Hey everyone, welcome into the latest edition of the Postcast, production of the Casper Star-Tribune and Pokes Authority. I am Davis Potter, Wyoming beat writer for the Star-Tribune, and I am joined, as I usually am, by our managing editor, former Wyoming beatnik, Brandon Foster. Brandon, I figure I might as well just go ahead and start the podcast and get this out of the way and announce that I am officially retiring to a private island with the substantial winning earnings that I got from winning our office bracket pools. So this is it for me. I'm done.
Well, yeah, I mean you've stolen my planned opening banter here, but yeah, I don't know how you convinced us to each put $10,000 on it, but kudos. That was good on you. So yeah, I don't think it was all that close, honestly. So well done. Yeah. Well, good job on Baylor. Recognizing that they're a good basketball team.
Well, if I told you why I made everybody contribute $10,000, then I'd have to kill you. So I got to keep that quiet.
Well, you have an island to escape to. So.
Yeah, I'm obviously being facetious here. I won enough money to I think pay for lunch for a few days. Which you know what, in 2021 we're taking all the wins we can get. So
I think you bought enough money to move to Grand Island, Nebraska. That's your island.
Yeah, I don't know if...
which is not an island.
Yeah, I don't know if that amount of money will pay for an island anywhere. But yeah, man, Baylor, I did not expect them to be that dominant, but sheesh, man, they were on one the other night against Gonzaga.
Yeah, I lucked out because I went home for a couple days for Easter to see my family, and we did Easter on that Saturday, just schedule-wise, and we were eating during the first Final Four game, got done just in time to watch the second Final Four game, and then I had plans during the championship game. So of the final three games, I picked the correct one to watch, which was the UCLA Gonzaga game, and I only barely caught any of the title game, but I am very content with how I ended my college basketball watching season, because that was one of the best games, if not that was the best college basketball game that I can recall watching. Maybe I've seen a better one and I'm forgetting about it. I mean, there are games obviously where I've had like personal investment in them, as a fan, that might have been more rewarding, or even covering a game live, has a different element. But as far as just like watching a tournament game, I can't think of a game better than that one, because it was so good throughout the game, regardless of the ending. And I feel like a lot of classic college basketball games are really just classic endings, right? Like crazy things that happen. But then it got a crazy ending on top of a game of just pretty much great offense for like 40 straight minutes. And that was a treat to watch. And yeah, I mean, maybe I missed it, but I'm not complaining about not having watched the Baylor Gonzaga game. No,
yeah, you took their words right out of my mouth. Because, outside of the Gonzaga-UCLA game, the Final Four really wasn't that good. I mean, they were all blowout, particularly, on Baylor's end, obviously. But, yeah, I mean, just the shot making, I mean, it was crazy. I mean, I think UCLA shot like 55% in that game from the field and still lost.
Yeah, I think it might have been more than that, yeah.
Yeah, maybe so. And also the officiating. Because, look, man, let's be honest. Like, the college officiating is on a lower level, and sometimes the games can be hard to watch. Like, college basketball in general sometimes can be a hard product to watch. When you get those officials that want to call 45 fouls a game and turn it into a free throw contest. But, I mean, even then, they let them play, and it was a fantastic game. Because, I mean, you mentioned it. We've seen all sort of buzzer beaters in the past, right? But for that game to be as back and forth as it was and free flowing, and then it was almost like, because when I think it was Juzang for UCLA got the rebound and the putback, I was like, yes, like I was like, yes, we're gonna get overtime. Like, I didn't want the game to end, and then bam, it was. Yeah. I mean, that was the one
double OT.
Yeah, that was the only game in the whole tournament like where I actually had a visible reaction. Like, I put my hands up on my head. I sort of gasped. That was the only time throughout the whole tournament that I ever had a reaction like that. So, yeah, it was great. Like I sort of mentioned last week, I mean, the tournament was overall really, really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I yelled on the there was the Alabama buzzer beater, if I remember right, that sent it to OT, but then they lost. But
which involved UCLA too, by the way.
That's right.
That's the only team in the tournament that was involved in buzzer beaters at the end.
That's funny. Yeah, and this one I fell out of my chair, like on the banked in shot. And yeah, it was, I don't know, it's just like from a neutral perspective, it was kind of an ideal game narrative wise too, because everyone assumed UCLA was a big underdog. So I was just rooting for a close game the whole time, which is what we got, which, to me just kind of meant rooting for UCLA, right? Because I felt like if Gonzaga got up, 8 points or whatever, they just start rolling, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, the game's pretty much over. I'm still kind of rooting for UCLA, and then Gonzaga was almost just kind of there, matching them blow for blow, and they really kind of played, I don't know, they were like kind of great villains, quote unquote, or the overdogs or the favorites. I mean, not that they were doing anything villainous, but they were just hanging in with the underdogs, and then on the very last play swooped in and took it. And I mean, a couple people tweeted out the ESPN graphic of the points side by side. I mean, there was like not much of a gap the entire game, and even good close back and forth college games or basketball games at any level will often be a game of runs, right? Like in general, it's a game of runs, and one team will go on a run to take a lead. The other team, if it's a good game, will bounce back and close that gap. And it wasn't even that. It was possession to possession. And I mean, I can think of very few college basketball games that I would willingly just like rewatch the entire thing, having already seen it. And that one is certainly one of them.
Yeah, instant classic, no doubt. But I was surprised that I was the only one in our bracket pool that had a Gonzaga Baylor final, or that picked that. I mean, they were the two best teams all year, clearly. And I tried to tell people on this very podcast, my bracket advice pretty much sucked in general. But one thing I was consistent with was that Baylor had the best backcourt in the country all year, and sure enough, those Maceo Teague, Davion Mitchell, and Jared Butler went off. I mean, it was crazy to see them just sort of score at will against Gonzaga like that. But
yeah, I mean, personally, I was just like, well, they had a COVID pause, and I know they've still looked good, but that can tend to screw teams up. So maybe that will, cause them to stumble too early, and that was basically the extent of my reasoning. Not having, I hadn't watched them probably for a full game all year, and I think, to be fair, in our bracket pool outside of us two, there might have been one other sports fan participating. Everyone else was just being a good sport, so there was that. Not to diminish from your championship, but that one probably falls on me. I probably should have paid more attention.
Well, no, it's fair, because even I mentioned leading up to the tournament that they had the COVID pause, and they didn't always look great those first 2 or 3 weeks back, but man, they found their form in the tournament. That's for sure. All right, so Brandon, Wyoming has started spring football. They've practiced twice now, and have had 2 media sessions. We've talked to Craig Bohl and a handful of players at this point. So we're going to sort of talk a little bit about spring football and sort of our takeaways so far. And then in this second segment, we will talk about where Craig Bohl ranks among Group of 5 head coaches, at least according to The Athletic, which released a list of its top 15 G5 coaches recently. So we'll hit on that a little bit later. But first, dive into just a little bit of spring football, and should mention that all the practices are closed to the media still. All of our interviews are over Zoom, so I mean we're sort of stuck having to take Craig and the players at face value with what they're telling us, because we're not out there watching anything or seeing what's going on. So still a little bit tough to I guess gauge and evaluate what you're really seeing. But Brandon, a couple takeaways for me talking to Craig and some of the players so far is first of all, the fact that Sean Chambers is still on the team at this point, considering the fact that he revealed earlier this week that he briefly contemplated giving up football, following those 3 season-ending injuries he's had in the last 3 years. And I guess it's not a real surprise, given the fact that when you consistently have, injuries back to back to back. I mean, yes, there's the physical part of that, right, and the rehab and the significant work that it takes to get back. But when you have those injuries consecutively, and you put so much work because it's going to be months and months of rehab, to get to a point where you're healthy enough again to perform at the level that you're capable of. And then to get that far, get healthy again, have another injury, and basically start all the way back at square one, that can take just as much of a mental toll. And, he even admitted the fact that, he kind of sort of went to a dark place mentally and wondered, started wondering, is football really for me? This college football thing, is it going to work out for me? And, said he, had a lot of conversations, with his family, and particularly his mom, who he said, told him that, nobody would blame him if he ended up walking away, but ultimately, he said that he's not a quitter, and he came to Wyoming, 3 years ago now. It's crazy to think that he's entering his fourth year in the program, and yet has only played 13 career games because of all the injuries. So he, talked about the fact that he came here to start something and to win games and to try to make this program into a Mountain West contender again, and basically said he's got unfinished business, and that it's not in his nature to just walk away, particularly when he feels like that there's an unfinished part to his career. So he's back again competing with Levi Williams for the starting quarterback job, and then Eric Aboyzi, the offensive lineman, on Thursday said that he has lost anywhere from 50 to 55 pounds, and I guess about 4 months worth of off season, because their season went to mid-December, and now we're here in mid-April. So very interesting on that front, because I do think he's one of their interior linemen that I think has a shot to get some real NFL looks, and that's something he mentioned when talking about his motivation to lose all this weight, was the fact that he has real aspirations at the next level, and if he didn't lose some weight, that wasn't going, or a shot at the NFL wasn't going to be realistic for him. And this is a guy that's played, around 360, 370 pounds. Craig Bohl actually said he was down to around 329 pounds now, or somewhere around that. So, you do the math, 329 plus 50. I mean, that's playing north of 370 pounds, which, aside from just, you start worrying about someone's overall health at that point, right? I mean, when you're approaching 4 bills, I mean, that's not always a good thing. But also he talked about the fact that, he just felt like he didn't feel great. His body didn't feel great. And, he wanted to lose some weight to become more effective. And he said, his body feels great now. He's moving better. He feels like his technique is better after losing all that weight. So, a couple of key players, obviously, for Wyoming on the offensive side of the ball, with some news, I guess, here in the first week of spring football.
Yeah, I mean, congratulations to Eric for being the only person to lose weight over the last year. So that's, good for him.
Good. Yeah, good point.
I was curious. We were talking before we hit record, and I remembered when Eric signed, he was still a pretty big guy back then. So I went to look up the story I wrote when he committed, and he was a pretty big get for Wyoming. He was originally committed to University of Minnesota. That didn't work out, and so he was a guy getting Power 5 looks and has that build. And it said he came in at 350 as straight out of high school, and he said the coaches wanted him down to 325 or 320, and personally it said it being past me, it says that he wanted to get to 305 or 300. So this is something that has been a goal of his for a long time. And so I think there's a quote here from Bohl, and he says, quote, he said he looks like 290, but I disagree with him. So that was back when he was at 350, and I mean that's kind of wild, considering it's we're recording this on April 8th. They wrapped up the season in
December 12th.
Yeah, that's less than 4 months.
Yeah,
and football players do crazy stuff in the off season with their bodies kind of all the time. We always, not always, but pretty frequently have stories about guys putting on a lot of weight in the off season. But it's impressive. I hope it it does leave him in a healthier place. And like I said, he's got that kind of build and physique that I think does lend itself to potentially getting looks at the next level. And so maybe this will work out for him. But yeah, I think you're right. You just got to feel like that's probably good for his health overall. I won't pretend to be an expert at pass blocking or anything to speak to how it'll work. But I think you can definitely be a good offensive lineman at only 330 pounds. I think that's still enough weight to throw around. So yeah, it'll be good to see if it pays off for him. But impressive that this has been a goal of his since 2018, and he pulled it off in 4 months. So
yeah, well, I mean, I think he's definitely got a shot at the next level. And again, that's what he said his main motivation was to lose this weight, because he's getting another year back, so he's technically still a junior, I guess. But if he goes out there and has another big year for them at his guard spot, you never know. I mean, you see guys' stocks just skyrocket all the time, right? I mean, the NFL draft's coming up at the end of this month, and there's guys that you never hear of before every April, when it's the draft just a few weeks away, and suddenly they come out of nowhere and shoot up draft boards. And so I mean, if there's a lot of NFL teams that are looking for interior linemen that are 6'4", 6'5", 330-pound road graders, and that's what Eric is. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Now he's got to get a little bit better with his pass protection, and Eric actually said on Thursday, when we talked to him, that this offensive line as a whole has got to get better in terms of its pass protection. And gave up 17 sacks last year in 6 games, so that's not great. So they've all got to get better in that aspect. But and it's funny, we asked him, what was the hardest food to give up, because obviously he's changed his diet, and he said everything. So. So I don't. He didn't really say what he was eating before that might have been unhealthy, but said he had to give up everything and basically start over in terms of his diet. But obviously another player that experienced along that offensive line, which returns all 5 starters, which sort of leads me to my next topic, and that is some of the injured players that are back and some that are still out. Alonzo Velazquez, the right tackle, who is coming off another knee surgery. He is back, though Craig Bohl said Thursday that he actually was held out of Thursday's practice because of a back issue, I think, that flared up on him. But Craig didn't sound like he was too worried about that being a long-term thing. And then Charles Hicks, outside linebacker, he had surgery at the end of last year too, but Craig said he's back and is actually full speed. Ravante Holt is still out at defensive tackle, recovering from his ACL surgery, and also Jordan Bornoli. He's also out for this spring rehab and an injury. So they're a little bit thin still at the defensive tackle spot, but you get Mario Moore back from an opt-out. You get Claude Cole back from an opt-out. Some of those guys and some of their younger players, it's a chance for them to get some reps on the interior of that offensive line, or defensive line, I should say. But one of the interesting things, too, that Craig mentioned this week is, despite the fact that they have, so many guys back, which includes all those players that opted out last season, despite, having a really good sense of his roster, since, most of these seniors decided to come back and most of their 2-deep back intact, he said flat out that every position is open in terms of competition. Now, I think that's more of just a general sense and maybe just wanting to get that out in public so that his players know, even if they had a starting job last year, maybe it's not necessarily secure, and just sort of breeding that competition. But, I mean, look, I don't think Chad Muma's job's in jeopardy at middle linebacker. I don't think that Garrett Krall's job at defensive end is in jeopardy. I think John Hoyland, who was placed on scholarship, by the way, the freshman kicker, I don't think, at least in the short term right now, I don't think he's in jeopardy of losing his job. But, I do think when you have so many people back, you're getting, guys back off opt-outs who, haven't really had any practice or game reps since, middle of October when they decided to opt out of the season. I guess it's a time to sort of reevaluate everyone who's still back in the fold and breed some of that competition to see which of these guys went out in terms of starting jobs.
Yeah, I feel like that's probably a good diplomatic way to handle that when you kind of have this abnormal situation of guys who sat out last year and for pretty atypical reasons, right? Like, this is not something coaches have traditionally had to deal with, of someone saying, "Oh, well, I'm not going to play this year because of the pandemic." That's a new one. So I think saying, "Hey, every job is up for grabs" is a pretty maybe politically savvy way to not have to maybe say there are guys who started that wouldn't have or something along those lines, or vice versa, that
right.
The guys coming back have to start in the doghouse or anything. I don't know if they do, but that's how I'd answer it if I were a coach, just to avoid the mess. So it'll be interesting. Yeah, I mean, and like you mentioned, John Hoyland getting on scholarship, I think that makes sense. You don't see too many walk-on All-Americans, so I think if you do see them, they don't stay walk-ons for very long. So Congrats to him for locking that job in and locking in a scholarship on top of it.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you go out there and lead the Mountain West in field goal percentage and scoring. I mean, people forget that he actually led the whole league in scoring last year, more than 9 points a game. Now, you obviously don't want your place kicker leading you in scoring, because that means your quarterbacks aren't throwing touchdowns, your running backs aren't running for touchdowns, and the offense isn't finding the end zone nearly as much as you'd like. But yeah, the guy goes out there and does that. I don't really think you have any choice but to reward him for a scholarship. So congrats to him. Another thing Craig did say, or I guess reinforced, even going back to last offseason when he said that Sean Chambers and Levi Williams were both going to play, he said that competition there is still open. And I don't know how much I necessarily believe that. I mean, Sean's been their starter for the last going on 3 seasons when he's been healthy. But maybe, I don't know. It's an interesting deal, particularly when you're trying to, and I think Sean's still going to be their starter as long as he stays healthy, just because of his running ability. I mean, that's something that Levi nor hardly any other quarterback in the Mountain West has in terms of a skill set. But again, both of these quarterbacks still have to show that they can be efficient in the passing game, that they can complete more than 50% of their passes. I mean, that's been the talking point with this offense all off season, is re-engineering this thing and becoming more multi-dimensional. I mean, that's what's been the talking point for almost the last 3 years now. So that's obviously going to be a focus. And Tim Polassek's offense. So I do wonder, maybe how that's going to play out, given that both of those quarterbacks still have to prove themselves as passers going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't think there's a big downside to, or I should say, I don't know there's a big upside to closing the door on the competition at that QB position, because at the end of the day, you want to be pretty well prepared at backup, just the way that the last few years have gone. So that means even if you have a pretty good sense that it's going to be Sean behind center, you still need to have your number 2 have some good confidence that they can be the guy if called upon. Or I guess maybe number 3 as well. You've got Beer up in the mix as well. But yeah, I mean, I guess the downside there is potentially you don't want to hurt Sean's confidence by suggesting he's not that you don't believe in him to win the job. But I think like you're saying, anyone who's watched the last few years has to assume he has a head start, and he probably knows that too. And as long as he's healthy, I think he'd be out there. But maybe if it's a closer spring than you expect, then you find ways to get some reps for Levi here and there. That doesn't hurt, even if you do have a defined A1 starter. And I don't know. I mean, competition tends to be a good thing. And I guess just going back to you had talked about earlier with Sean and him kind of having to decide whether he wanted to keep doing this. I think those are pretty natural thoughts, like you were saying with the way his career has gone, and it sounds weird, but almost like good to hear him say those things, because it feels like the most healthy way to react to the way that his last year especially has gone. And
Right.
it seems like it's only sane to feel that way. But all that being said, if you're the head coach and that's maybe where your quarterback's head was at in the offseason, I mean, you've got to always have a plan B. So you even if Sean never had that thought for a second, you still want to have a backup quarterback who's confident, and that having it be at least somewhat of an open competition is probably a good way to do that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point that you make, because we can go off on so many different tangents about players and the money they make for schools, but these guys are go out there and are entertainment for fans, right? Sometimes it's easy to forget that these players are human beings, and they have human emotions, and it was good to, I guess, hear him be human for a second and say, yeah, I really did struggle with this. This is something that I've been dealing with for 3 years. I've had, some of the worst luck with injuries, and, it really took a mental toll on me. And, I did think about it. And, you just wonder, what if it were to happen for a fourth time? I mean, God forbid, but, it's, obviously that's something that weighs on him heavily, and he thinks about, and how could you not, after what he's been through. So, yeah, I mean, that you hope that he can stay healthy, not only for Wyoming's sake, but for his sake and for his well-being going forward, because he's had all these injuries to his legs and his knees, and he's still got a life to live once he's done playing football. So you hope he can stay healthy going forward for sure. But I think one of the benefits to having so much experience back is the fact that you can probably start making some depth chart decisions by the end of spring, and that's something Craig Bohl actually said was one of their main objectives over these 15 spring practices. Is we're going to compete, but going into the summer, we really want to nail down this depth chart, and that's a little bit easier to do and faster to do, right? When you have a roster that you're already so familiar with.
Yeah, and I think not to spend too much time on the QB position, but just another thing that made me think of is Sean probably has had a very even more challenging situation when you factor in the kind of context with which he joined this program. I mean, he committed to Wyoming, I think, right in the middle of all the Josh Allen hubbub, and there's just such a mystique around that position of playing quarterback at Wyoming all of a sudden, and who's gonna replace him. I know obviously he didn't directly replace him, but he kind of took over that position in the first post Allen season, and he's a kid from the same area of California. You'd have to imagine he kind of came out here with big dreams in mind of I don't want to just succeed here at Wyoming. This is going to be a launching pad for me too, and to have to swallow those season-ending injuries, not to mention last year being on the just as early as it came. That's just grueling. But even all that on top of probably the expectations he had for himself coming in to Wyoming, it's a lot for a 18-year-old kid through however old he is now, I guess early 20s to process. So yeah, I mean, I'm glad that he did open up like that, and not related to the depth chart or to the quarterback position, but to put you on the spot here, Davis, just one question I have out of curiosity from what we were talking about earlier is how does a team even go about finding a walk-on kicker who turns out to be the freshman All-American? Do you know the backstory? Because I mean, there are times when teams never even have a backup kicker. Period. I mean, I think Bohl's first couple of years, or at least the first couple of years I was on the beat, Cooper didn't have a backup. There was just maybe an emergency guy, or the punter would step in. They brought on, I forget the player's name, but they brought on a walk-on transfer at one point from Oregon State. But I mean, there are times where they literally don't have a backup. Do you know how they came to, and maybe you've written about this, I apologize, but how they came to have a backup who turned out to be so good?
I do not. But Food for thought. Good story idea there, Brandon.
All right, we'll delete it. Nobody stay away, Michael Katz. This is not your story.
No, but I don't, because nobody knew who John Hoyland was this time a year ago. I mean, he was so buried on the depth chart. Craig Bohl or any coaches made no mention of John Hoyland leading into last spring because Luke Glassock was supposed to be the kicker, replacing Cooper, and all of a sudden, Luke pulls a hamstring or has some sort of hamstring injury, and they tried out for their first field goal against Nevada last October, and we're all sitting there in the press box like, who is number 46? What's going on? We're just scouring the depth chart to find out who this kid is, and that was the first time I think really anybody had ever heard of him. And so, no, I really don't know what the backstory is or how he ended up at Wyoming. But there are a lot of places that, sort of have these late special teams additions, right, that sort of nobody's ever heard of or sort of fall through the cracks. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not necessarily different that he was a walk-on, because normally you only spend a scholarship player on one or two specials, right? Like your starting kicker, your starting punter, whoever.
Sure.
But, I mean, walk-ons usually fill out the depth chart at those specialist positions. But, yeah, no, that's a good question, because I don't know if anybody really knows outside of, I guess, John and Wyoming's coaches, how he ended up at Wyoming. But he's been a hell of a find for him.
He just walked into Laramie one day, just strolled down 3rd Street from the wilderness and put on a helmet. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that college football coaches are, like, the most, like, I mean this in a nice way, but paranoid people on the planet as far as just needing to control every little detail and manage just this huge program of hundreds of people and personnel. And yet, I don't think it's uncommon for there, especially at this level, to be teams that don't really have a backup at kicker, or at least one that they know what they can do. And, like, there are few positions that can swing a crucial moment in a game the way a kicker can if your starter goes down. And I think that just speaks to how limited that position pool can be, I think, compared to other positions. I mean, there's only so many people out there who know how to do that very specific thing very well. And for them to have found such a good one, and for him to have been a backup, it's a cool story. And, again, congrats. It's always very cool to see walk-ons start to get that scholarship money. So good for him.
Yeah, well, you're the jinx, Brandon. So when he starts missing a bunch of kicks next year, you guys can blame Brandon Foster for that.
Hey, man, he got his money. Doesn't matter. It's like whenever a team finally signs someone to a big long-term deal in the pros, and then they just start tanking. Yeah. One of those. No, he'll be great.
No, he showed no signs of slowing down last year. Rain, sleet, or snow, whatever it was. And they had, played in that blizzard against Boise State at the end of the year. It was missed one kick all year. And that was a field goal. It's perfect on extra points, and I think right at 93% on field goals. So, yeah, a hell of a find for that staff. And it's certainly paying off for John now, literally. Wyoming will have its third practice on Saturday. There is no media availability for that, so the next time that we'll get to talk to Craig and some players will be Tuesday. But be sure to check out trib.com and pokesauthority.com for all of our spring football coverage. Brandon, let's go ahead and take a break there, and when we come back on the other side, we will look at this list of Group of 5 head coach rankings put out by The Athletic. into the postcast, and now we're going to talk about where Craig Bohl is ranked on this list of Group of 5 head coaches that was recently released by The Athletic. Chris Vanini of The Athletic actually put this list out of the top 15 Group of 5 college football coaches, and Craig Bohl is number 11 on this list. And I think Chris has been putting this list out for a few years now, and he actually dropped. Chris had him at number 5 on this list last year. Dropped to number 11. I'll go ahead and, before we just talk about this a little bit more, I'll just list the 10 coaches that Chris has listed ahead of him. At the top of the list is Luke Fickell, Cincinnati, which I don't have any problem with whatsoever. If they had played enough games, they only played 10 this year, but if the Bearcats had played enough games, they probably would have had their third straight 11-win season. Obviously, was the highest-ranked Group of 5 conference champion and got to play in the New Year's Six Bowl against Georgia last year, so no problem with that. Billy Napier, Louisiana, comes in at number 2. Yeah, I don't have any problem with that. They've really been rolling, and that would have been a fun matchup last year. If, Louisiana and Wyoming were supposed to play in the non-conference portion of their schedule until COVID sort of blew all that up. Bill Clark for UAB is at number 3. And honestly, I could make a strong case for Bill Clark moving up to number 2 on this list. I mean, Bill Clark, for people that don't know, UAB shut down its football program back in 2013 or 14. I think 14 was their first year back. But anyway, in those 6 or 7 years since, he's already led them to 2 of the last 3 Conference USA championships. I think he was in the mix for some bigger jobs, some Power 5 jobs this past offseason. But, I mean, he's done a phenomenal job, so no issue with that at all. Lance Leopold of Buffalo comes in at number 4. Hugh Freeze, the coach that I used to cover down at Ole Miss before all that blew up in his face, comes in at number 5. Which Chris explains here because Liberty is an independent. Technically, they don't belong to a conference, but he said he's counting non-Notre Dame independents on this list.
Take that, BYU.
When he was at Ole Miss, he beat Nick Saban 2 years in a row. So, I mean, anytime you're doing that, you're probably going to be on a list like this. Frank Solich at Ohio, the winningest coach in MAC history. 12 straight non-losing seasons. Can't really argue that a whole lot. Jamie Chadwell at Coastal Carolina comes in at number 7. They obviously had the breakthrough year there, where I think they won 11 games. So, he obviously he went from not ranked on this list last year to number 7. Jeff Monken at Army. Hard to really argue that too. I mean, before Monken got there, they had 18 losing seasons in 19 years, and they've won at least 8 games in 4 of the last 5 years. So, not much to argue there. Ken, the Navy's coach, I'm going to butcher his last name if I try to.
New Matalolo.
Yeah, if I try to announce that. So, I'm going to stay away from that. And then Gus Malzahn, the former Auburn coach, who is entering his first year at UCF. Obviously, he wasn't eligible for this list since he wasn't a Group of 5 coach until, I guess, this offseason. But pretty good success at Auburn. Led him to a national championship game appearance, won an SEC title, played for another one. Not shocking that he's in the top 10. And then Craig Bohl comes in at number 11. And the rest of the list, if anybody else cares about it, Willie Fritz at Tulane comes in at number 12. BYU's Kalani Sitake at number 13, Troy Calhoun at Air Force, number 14, and rounding out the list is Louisiana Tech's Skip Holtz. Brandon, I'll just go ahead and read what Chris wrote about Craig. Said, it's been tough to evaluate Bohl's last few years at Wyoming with all the quarterback injuries. Wyoming went 2-4 last season, causing Bohl to drop down this list. Still, Wyoming had won 8 games in 3 of the 4 previous seasons. It was the first time since the late 90s that Wyoming had posted 4 consecutive non-losing seasons, and of course Bohl built North Dakota State into the premier FCS program, going 104-32 overall and 43-2 with 3 national championships in his final 3 years. I don't think that's not right, though, right? Wyoming, he said Wyoming had won 8 games in 3 of the last 4 years. I think it was 2 of the last 4. They've only won 8 games in 2 of the years he's been here.
Yeah, I don't.
Correct, or am I?
That sounds wrong. Let me see.
I'll pull it up real quick.
Yeah, anyway, to stall for time, I just thought of a great new feature the Athletic should take up. They have a new deal every 3 weeks, it feels like, where you can subscribe for $2, but they should have a promotion where Davis just reads people The Athletic without a paywall. For the next 6 months, Davis will read any article you want from The Athletic for free.
Hey man, if they'll pay me.
No, he is right. So okay, they one of their 8-win years was they won 7 regular season, and then they won the Idaho Potato Bowl, and then
okay, that's right. Yeah. My fault.
Well, I guess two of those years.
My fault, Chris. If you ever listen to this,
good job, Athletic fact checking team. Yeah, they had 2 7-win regulars. I mean, I think there's a pretty good argument to be made for not including bowl wins or losses in the way you evaluate teams and coaches, but that's another conversation for another day.
Okay. We did all that to get to this question, Brandon. Do you agree with that ranking, or do you have a major problem with it?
I think
I don't necessarily.
I didn't have a problem with the number kind of in and of itself when you mentioned to me he was 11th. When you see that he fell from 5 to 11 in 1 year, that feels a little stark. Just because last year was so wonky, they only played 6 games, and like Chris mentioned, they had yet another quarterback injury. But when you look at the list above him, they all seem to have pretty good cases for for being on high spots on that list. And I mean, you look at who moved up, right? Luke Fickell moved up. You can't above Bohl. You can't really argue that one. Same with Billy Napier. Hugh Freeze.
Well, I'll just say most coaches in that top 10 have won if not multiple conference championships or division championships within their conference. So Bohl's won 1 division championship in 7 years at Wyoming. So I mean that.
Yeah.
It's hard to argue with, just in terms of on paper the results.
Sure. Yeah, I think we could spend 40 minutes just talking about Hugh Freeze, but I think it's one of those
another podcast, Brandon. Another podcast.
It's one of those deals where you're like, okay, the number sounds low, and then you look at who's above it, and then it's like, okay, I can't make great arguments against it. And I don't think not that Craig Bohl seems to be a coach who gets caught up in these things, but I don't think he'd have an issue with it either, because he seemed to take having a losing record last year to heart. That was it seemed to really bug him, even if it was a weird shortened year. And I think at a certain point, yes, there's context to winning at Wyoming and winning at UCF. The coach above him, those are at least now 2 very, very different propositions, and insane. I would say much more challenging to succeed at Wyoming when you consider it's maybe the smallest FBS market, whereas UCF is in Orlando and is like one of the biggest schools in the country. There's a context to like what he's done at Wyoming, and the idea that even just being consistently good at Wyoming is a good step forward for this program. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the resume is not quite there to line him up with the guys ahead of him. At least at the FBS level, obviously, depends how heavily you want to weigh in the NDSU stuff.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't have a huge gripe with this list. Or even where Craig is on it. I do think he deserves to be somewhere in the top 10. And this is why. You mentioned this a little bit, and it's the past that Wyoming has in football. Historically, it's been really hard to sustain success at Wyoming. Before Craig Bohl took over the program, they had only 3 winning seasons since the turn of the century, and only once did Wyoming reach 8 wins during that span, and that was back in 2011 under Dave Christensen. So the fact that you put together 4 straight bowl-eligible seasons, or let me put it this way. The fact that you can put together 4 straight bowl-eligible seasons, when that has not been done at Wyoming since the late 90s, I mean, that pretty much tells you all you need to know. And it's without a doubt one of the hardest jobs in the country when you consider some of the natural recruiting disadvantages that come with this job.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked in the past, I brought up the fact that Craig Bohl is now the highest paid coach in the Mountain West. And I guess we can sort of go ahead and just lump this into this conversation because I think it's relevant somewhat when you talk about expectations. When you have the highest paid coach in the league, what are the expectations now? And does that change expectations? I don't think that's a conversation you can have or a determination you can make in a vacuum, right? Because it's really hard to sit there and say, okay, he's the highest paid coach in the Mountain West now. We as Wyoming fans, the Wyoming fan base, we demand that you turn Wyoming into the Alabama of the Mountain West. That's not a realistic thing, right? And I don't know how many fans actually have that mindset, if any, because again, I mentioned that the built-in recruiting disadvantages. First of all, he's coaching in one of the few states that doesn't have an in-state recruiting base, right? In terms of higher tier Division I talent. I mean, Wyoming signs 1 scholarship player a year, basically, in their recruiting class. So you have that. You're in a state that's isolated. And then in a place where you have frigid temperatures during football season, and you have to sell kids on, hey, come play football at a school where, come late October into November, there's a chance every home game on the schedule you could come with a couple inches of snow on the ground. I mean, that's really, really hard to recruit to. So Wyoming's not getting 4 or 5-star kids. And Craig's talked about this so many times and brought it up so many times, the fact that this is the developmental program. And you have to bring kids here, that I guess are lower-ranked kids, 2-star, 3-star, if you want to look at recruiting rankings, and even some walk-ons. I mean, some of their most successful players, Marcus Epps, Garrett Krall. So, it's not going to be a thing where Wyoming's going to compete for a conference championship every single year. It's just not. You have to get to a place where, again, in terms of development, where you get, those juniors and seniors that turn into 3- and 4-year starters and have a lot of pieces to the puzzle, which makes this upcoming season, I think, one where expectations should be higher maybe than normal just because of all the experience that you do have coming back. But that's sort of what you have to have, right? You sort of have to have development and just sort of the stars align for you to where you have an experienced and talented enough team to where you can make a run at it. Now, I will say this. There's always a certain level of expectation, though, that comes with being the highest paid coach in your conference, right? Like, it's not acceptable for any coach to have a losing record, right? I mean, let alone a coach that's getting paid more than anybody else in your conference. I mean, they're paying you this sort of money to win football games, right? And, the fact that, that they haven't been all that competitive with the teams in recent years that have finished in the top half of their division or top half of the conference. They're 2-9 since 2018 against those kind of teams. The Boise States, the Utah States, those teams that you have to compete with year in, year out if you want to get to a Mountain West championship, or at least, win the division to have the chance to play for a Mountain West championship. That they've really struggled with that. But the thing that really makes this weird, and I'm glad Chris pointed it out in his rankings, was this past year an anomaly, or is it more cause for concern? You don't really know because your primary quarterback, the guy that's been your starter when he's healthy, has spent more time on the sideline the last few years than he's actually been on the field. And that makes it really hard to gauge, would the 2019 season have turned out different if Sean Chambers had stayed healthy all year? I'm positive that the season would have been more successful for them last season if Sean Chambers stays healthy. They couldn't score against Boise State. They couldn't even score against New Mexico. Couldn't score much against Colorado State, which that game was just sort of a disaster all across the board. I think that was the worst defensive game that Wyoming played all year. But your starting quarterback stays healthy, you're going to be more productive on offense. I mean, that's common sense, right? So it does make it hard to gauge, what kind of progress and even maybe halting some of this program's momentum or progression to an extent, just because you haven't been able to keep your starting quarterback healthy and keep him on the field. So I guess I say all that to say that, I think Wyoming is at a point now in Craig's tenure, entering his 8th season, where if you're able to stay healthy, you're able to have the depth that he sort of accumulated, 8 years into his tenure. I think Wyoming is a program that should expect to, make a run at the Mountain Division every 2 or 3 years and play for a Mountain West Championship every 2 or 3 years. I think they can do that because, that's 2 or 3 years in between where you're able to, obviously recruit more kids and develop them over those 2 or 3 years and, again, get them to a point where they're upperclassmen and seniors. And that's what you got to have at a developmental program like Wyoming.
Yeah, I think, I think my sort of take on where this program should be pretty soon, if it's not already, is a team that is at least in the running for division championship every year. Not to say they're going to win it every year, not to say that they're going to, maybe even be one game out, but I think they should be competitive to win the Mountain Division every year. Now, I think when you're in the same division as Boise State, like there are going to be years if Boise is on point and everything is going well for them, everything's clicking, like it's a lot to ask almost any G5 team to consistently be at that level as well, or beating it. And obviously you have to play Boise every year. But I think they are at a point, or they should be soon, where they are consistently at least in the running, in the way that, they have been, at least, I think 2017 is an example for me. They didn't make it that year, but when you go back and look at game by game, like they were actually pretty close to being very, in the running to represent the Mountain Division, if not actually doing it. I think as far as Bohl's pay goes, I think that's certainly, a very fair metric. I mean, I do think it probably won't be long before Andy Avalos makes more than him, if I'm guessing. I'm not quite sure how their salaries are structured, but my guess is either inherently through the contract he signed, or if, Boise has the success that it has for the last 2 decades, he's going to start making more money. I was going to say, like, if he goes out there and kills it in his first year at Boise, he'll get a contract extension and a raise immediately. Yeah,
sort of how that works.
So I don't know that Bohl will hold that title for long, but yeah, I mean, and this is all sort of a relative conversation, right? Because when you're a state's highest paid public employee, like you could argue that Bohl should also be plowing the streets when we have a snowstorm if he's going to make that much money. but within the framework of the NCAA and how much coaches make, like I think. When you first brought that up, we talked about like, oh, that sounds surprising, but then look around the league and there's not a single coach that jumps out to me that I'm like, oh, why isn't he making more now that Harson's there? I think, to me, this last year is also a bit of a, if not a fluke, like something I'm in general a fan of not overreacting to these wonky seasons in all sports right now. And more just for the reason that, it was a short year. It was a year that was off and then was on again. It was a year that, no fans in the stands. I mean, there's just a lot of like weird things to it. I'm not a huge fan of overreacting. That said, didn't seem to hurt Coastal Carolina that much, right? Like, people still, it happened and people's reputations did change. As far as the quarterback thing, though, I think obviously it's had a huge effect on this program the last few years, but at a certain point when it keeps happening every year, it's not really a free excuse card anymore, right? Like if it happened again this year, I don't think you could just say like, man, Craig Bohl can't catch a break. Like at a certain point you have to have the understanding that that's a very real possibility, and you got to have a really good plan B. And I mean, right now, and we've talked about their plan B earlier this episode and the way they're approaching that. But I think, at a certain point that becomes less of an excuse when it continues to happen. And, even before Sean, like we said, they've had quarterback injury problems even earlier in his tenure. So I think that does have a huge effect on the ceiling of this program. I think, we've talked at length about them fixing the offense to at least get it back to a decent place. And I think that will ultimately determine their ceiling as well. But, if they can just like have a decently average Mountain West offense and get out of that rut and yeah, I mean potentially just keep their quarterbacks healthy. I think this is a program that year in and year out seems to be on that trajectory, where they can at least be in the running every year, if not, and I think like you're saying, at least make it every at the very least every 5 years. I mean, I don't know how many more years Bohl's going to coach at Wyoming when you start talking in 5-year increments, but if that offense gets okay, they have, I think, the defense. There's kind of a culture there, like we talked about, of this defense being good, and that's, Bohl's a defensive-minded coach, and you have there are, like you said, there are very many recruiting disadvantages to getting kids. Like some kids just are not going to come play in a city with that weather, in a place where there's not a Target or a Chipotle, in a place where there's not a big city, there's not a beach. Some kids that's just going to be a deal breaker. But what they do have one advantage is I think Wyoming is getting to a point, and I can't actually speak. I can't remember the last couple of years, and last year was weird. But I think they're getting to a point where they should be a team that expects to win the vast majority of their home games. I think playing at the War is tough just because of that weather, because of the atmosphere or the altitude, and hopefully when fans get back, because of that too. But I think once you're a team where you're going to have a good head coach, a good defense, and a good chance to win every home game, suddenly your percentages are in your favor, right? And you just gotta stop losing the games you shouldn't lose, and then you got to start picking off at least every so often, those upsets or those wins at Boise and stuff like. They've still never won at Boise State. It's a lot to ask to be the Alabama of your division when you haven't even won at the home field of one of your opponents. So, I mean, right. All this again is also within the context of I don't know Craig Bohl's long-term plans. He seems to be a pretty forward-thinking coach as far as wanting to build something sustainable and that lasts a while. And I think if he left tomorrow for a different job, he will have definitely left this program in a really good spot and a better spot than he got here. But if he really wants to be kind of the guy they build a statue of when he leaves and stay for maybe another 10, 15 years, or even just 10, what I think of where this program is could differ based on that answer, I guess is my point. And, I think it's interesting to look at these lists of coaches because these tend to obviously be the coaches that are the hot prospects to take Power 5 gigs when they open up. And Bohl has had his name certainly thrown around in his time as Wyoming, maybe less so now than a few years back. But I think he's probably shown that he's not jumping to get out. If he was going to leave, it'd probably be for the perfect opportunity. And I could very much see it getting to a point where he's just, fine with being a career Wyoming guy and not looking elsewhere, especially if those, like the K-State job is a good example. I think that right. Maybe would have been a perfect fit and now is no longer an option. If he does stay here for a long time, I think expectations do grow, especially if he's the highest coach in the conference. But I think there's
highest paid. You mean
what I say?
You said the highest. You left out the paid part. Let's not insinuate anything.
He is also the highest coach in the Mountain West when they're all standing on their home fiels. But
he's also at the highest elevation too. So I guess
that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
That's the only thing I was saying. In fact, I mean, I think I don't know. You get in an interesting territory there too, though. Like when someone starts to become close to a legend, and I'm not saying he's anything like that, but I think when you start to think of him in that here's a guy who coached at Wyoming for 20 years. The expectations grow, but you also do start to get a little bit more of a cushion, of what people will put up with. So I don't know. I mean, for me, when I try to evaluate Bohl's job here, I think it'll be much easier to do in hindsight because looking forward, I just don't know what time frame to evaluate it under. But I guess that's true for many Group of 5 coaches.
Yeah. I will say your point about quarterback development that's a good point. Because I mean, look, Sean's not the only one that got hurt last year. Levi Williams, hurt his shoulder. And they had to bring in a true freshman to play, some snaps in those last two games. And yeah, that's going back to our conversation about spring football. That's why they got to build some depth at that position. And get guys, if something does happen where they can at least have somebody competent that can go in there and execute a play call and complete a pass. And it's just, obviously there's going to be a drop off when you lose not only 1-2 quarterbacks, but 2 quarterbacks. But, where it's just not so much disarray where you just look completely non-functional. Which is what happened last year. When both of those quarterbacks were out. I mean, they didn't score a touchdown against Boise State. Again, couldn't score enough points. 17 points against New Mexico, which was at the time was allowing more points than anybody in the country. It got ugly there at the end. But it's also going back to the fact that Sean hasn't been able to stay healthy. That's also why I've always said I want to wait and see what Wyoming looks like, in a full season where Sean's able to stay healthy and lead the offense for a whole 12 games.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, again, he's entering his 4th year in the program, and, nobody has come close to seeing that. But I will say, if they do get that this year, and he's able to get through the full season healthy, yet they're sitting there, early mid-November struggling to get to bowl eligibility, and the offense and particularly the passing game continues to be anemic, then it might be a cause for concern. But I would like to wait and see a full season with Sean Chambers under center before we start making some real assessments about the trajectory of this program or where it's headed. But look, again, I think the floor right now is bowl eligibility. Like Craig has proven, hey, you can get to 6 or 7 wins and get to bowl game just about every year at Wyoming. So all that's left now is a championship. Like, you got to go win a Mountain West championship. Like, that's the one thing that's missing off of his resume at this point. So
San Jose State did it, so no excuse.
Yeah, I mean, the Fighting Spartans, who, by the way, did you see where they hired a former Mountain West basketball coach? Yeah,
I did.
But yeah, I mean that's it for this team. I don't think necessarily just becoming bowl eligible. I don't think that's the end game anymore. I mean, because again, I think that's the floor for this program under Craig Bohl now, because he's shown that you can bring that sort of consistency, in terms of winning enough games to be eligible for the postseason. Now it's, hey, go win a Mountain West championship. And closest they've been is playing for it back in 2016. But I guess that's a very long-winded way of saying I don't I think he deserves to be somewhere in the top 10 just considering what he's done at a program like Wyoming. But I don't think any Wyoming fan can realistically look at that and say, I don't think that's right. I mean, I think that's about right for what he's done. Like looking at that list, I would probably put Craig in the top 10 ahead of Jamie Chadwell, who he had a lot of success too at Charleston Southern before he came to Coastal Carolina, but he's only been at Coastal for 2 years. So I would like to see a little bit more, get deeper into his tenure there if he stays there for a while. Of course, if he has another year like they did last year, he may be at a Power 5 job sooner rather than later. But I would just like to see a little more consistency in terms of maintaining that success. So that's just more of a link thing for me. The fact he's only been there for 2 years, but. I think overall, I think it's pretty fair considering what he's done at Wyoming and some of the questions that still linger based on what they've done over the last few seasons.
Yeah, and I think I would imagine you write a list like that a little bit with like a coaching candidate framework in mind. Maybe it wasn't said. I don't think it was stated in the article, but like I said, I think that's how national media tend to look at G5 coaches. Is okay, who's a guy who could fill an opening when my team fires their Big 12 head coach. But and I think to an extent Craig Bohl doesn't have that appeal that some other guys do, if only because he is 62 years old now. He's never coached as a head coach in a Power 5 capacity, and even when he was a Power 5 coordinator, it didn't go that great. I imagine he's not like that 2016-17 window might have been his best window potentially to capitalize on, because some programs just aren't going to hire a 62-year-old head coach, to get their first shot at a Power 5 gig. So that could have a role too, I think, maybe in where he sits. But yeah, and I guess, to a couple points to add on to, the bowl thing, I think is important. The bowl with the W thing, as far as winning 6 games. I think that's important distinction that you make, that that can't be good enough long term, because also it is easier to make a bowl than it had been historically. So I think that's worth throwing out there too, at least when you're saying, hey, the program had never made bowls this consistently. Like, when you go back even 20 years, there just weren't as many bowls as there are now. But, I think, to play sort of devil's advocate to my own point earlier about QB health, it is very possible that, they've just had terrible luck. And if he has a healthy quarterback, they'll just be as good as everyone wants them to be here in Wyoming, because I just did the math, and he's coached 7 years here, right? This will be his 8th, but he's coached 7 years.
Right.
In those 7 years, he has finished the year with at least the regular season, with his starting quarterback healthy in 2 of them, if I'm not mistaken. And in those 2 years, it was one, not a good year, but his very first year, which I don't think, anyone wants to evaluate Bohl too heavily on what he did in 2014, especially since they really switched up what the program's offensive approach was and everything. And then the second year was 2016, when they won the division and came within a touchdown of winning a conference title. Every other year, they did not end the year with a healthy starting quarterback. I mean, you can't understate that. Even, I mean, I stand by my point of you got to be prepared for it at this point, but that's crummy luck. And that 2017 year, like I was saying, I don't think they would have made the title game, but I think it looks nicer on his resume when you look back. And if you had said, oh, they actually won 10 games that year, if Allen stays healthy for the last two games, I don't know. So I think you're right. Like hopefully we do finally get to see a full season of a healthy Sean Chambers, and then I think it'll be a lot easier to evaluate the trajectory of this program than it is coming off a weird shortened pandemic season.
Yeah. Well, look, man, I think he's got the deepest team that he's had at Wyoming, easily. I think the most experienced team he's had at Wyoming coming up this year. Again, if they're able to stay healthy, particularly at quarterback, this should be a team that should be right there in the thick of it. Again, because we talked about last season, despite the fact that you're without QB1 again. This was a defense that still finished top 30 nationally in rushing yards and points allowed. The defense isn't going to be the problem. If Wyoming, again, if you come mid-November and Wyoming's sitting there with 5 wins, it's gonna be either because the offense didn't perform, or God forbid there was another injury to Sean or any other quarterback. But if they're able to stay relatively healthy on that side of the ball, I don't think there's any reason that they shouldn't be right in the thick of it and make their first real run at a conference championship since that 2016 season. And give Craig that one thing that he's missing on his resume, at least at the FBS level. So anything else? I think we've been talking about this long enough, so we can get out of here. But any parting shots?
Yeah, I think that's a good. Yeah, I think best case scenario for where this program's headed is they just have had terrible luck at QB health, and they're going to start winning 10 games every year. I think the worst case scenario is they really can't figure the offensive thing out, and he's clearly committed with the hiring of Polisek to not necessarily hiring some new offensive guru who's going to do something completely different. He's committed to his approach, and worst case is if they can't get that sorted out, all the nice things we've said about what he's done for the program, if you can't score points, you're only going to coach for so long in college football. So hopefully next year we have a little bit more clear of a crystal ball.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, as always, be sure to check out Trib.com and PokesAuthority.com for all of our coverage. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Pokes Authority. You follow me on Twitter at Davis E. Potter. You can follow Brandon on Twitter at BFoster91. This podcast is on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and Omni, so be sure to subscribe, download it, and give us that 5-star rating if you were so inclined. You can also find this podcast on our website at the Pokescast link, which is updated every time a new episode is published. Brandon, appreciate you joining me as always, and thank all of you guys for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you, David. Sorry, I really quick want to fact check myself before someone tweets at us. It's possible in 2015 they ended with their healthy starting quarterback, but at some point during the year he was hurt, and they played Nick Smith and Josh Allen. So don't add us. Moral of the Pokescast, don't add us.